There is finally a resolution in the standoff between Russia and Ukraine over fuel supplies as winter approaches. The European Union brokered a deal with Russia to resume gas supplies to Ukraine. The agreement also ensures supplies to EU countries via Ukraine. This comes as pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine prepare to hold a controversial election on Sunday. Russia backs the move, but Western governments and Kiev say the planned elections are illegal and would prolong the conflict there. For analysis, we turn to Anthony Salvia. He is a former U.S. State Department official and a Russian and Ukraine specialist and a great friend of Arise America. It's good to see you, Anthony. How are you? So they finally come to this deal, and of course, winter is barreling toward them, yes. Brutal winter, so this was an important deal to make.
Absolutely.
Breathe a sigh of relief?
Oh, totally. I think for the Ukrainians, for sure, because Russia had actually suspended gas deliveries, so that was already in place, and they were facing the suspension in a winter without gas supplies, which is not a great thing. So this deal is very significant. You know, it's progress. In a very tense situation between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, they finally came to this agreement. So as of, once the Ukrainians make this initial payment, within 2 days, Russia will resume gas deliveries.
Yeah, and as I understand it, the little details, and they're probably, it's too much in the woods, but it's an agreement to pay off a $4.6 billion debt. They have to make this payment that you just referred to, little over $1.4 billion by the end of the week. Next week, really, it's the EU countries, probably the IMF, that's helping to make that payment. Why are they so motivated to do that?
Because the danger would be that since the pipelines, there are two pipelines that go through Ukraine in effect. One is bound for Europe, one goes to Ukraine. In the past, we had a situation where when there was non-payment, and there was a gas dispute, a payment dispute between Russia and Ukraine, Russia suspended deliveries, Ukraine began siphoning off gas bound for Europe. And Europe did not want to see a repetition of that, right? So that's why it's very significant. The Europeans had a very powerful motive. Nobody wanted to go into this kind of, the whole political situation of having a situation where European gas supplies are interrupted because of a price dispute between Russia and Ukraine. So consequently, the Europeans had a huge motive in making this happen. Of course, the U.S. is in there as well because IMF is largely a U.S. thing. And what this reflects is the fact that basically the U.S. and Europe are being forced to take ownership now for what goes on in Ukraine, since this current government and the whole situation there is really the result of U.S. and European efforts to change the whole situation.
I want to talk a little bit about the election, the parliamentary elections that were had last week. There's another election coming up this weekend. Before we get to that, the fact that this deal was struck, is this a good sign for the relationship between Russia and Ukraine and even the EU?
It is. I mean, they're negotiating. In other words, the Russians are accepting the legitimacy of this government in Kiev, which they have a lot of problems with on many fronts. But okay, this is a positive thing, and the Ukrainians get the gas they wanted. The Europeans are recognizing reality that you cannot sort of do in Ukraine what you want to do without taking into account the interests of Russia. And this is the reality that Ukraine faces. It does look east and west, and ultimately negotiation and peaceful settlement of disputes is is the only situation that makes sense for Ukraine, unless you really want to see the place torn asunder. It's already in a bad state.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And speaking of bad state, let's talk about the internal government there. As we said, that there were parliamentary elections last week that require a coalition government. So let's piece that out just a little bit. Okay. Hopefully we have time to move on. Okay. How much hope do you hold out that a coalition government can be formed and that it will work together?
Well, I think it can be formed. The problem is that the president's party did not will control the majority of seats, but he did not really win the popular vote total. And so the prime minister, the previous one, whose party did win, I know it's getting complicated, but he's claiming the right to form the government. They can get together on this. There will be a government. I mean, basically, there's the actual political differences between all of between the major parties and the smaller parties are not that great.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we've got to stop the conversation right there. Maybe we can talk next week after these elections held by the pro-Russian separatists.
Okay.
Anthony
Salvia,
thank you so much.
Thank you.